Welcome to Ambition's Apex, your guide to mastering the art of physique transformation and achieving peak performance across all arenas of life. Our mission is not just to sculpt bodies, but to change lives, empowering you towards excellence. Dive in with us as we explore insights and strategies designed to elevate you towards your journey of self-improvement. Enjoy the ascent. Welcome back to another episode of Ambition's Apex. If you are new here, my name is Sean Irwin. I am the primary host here. I'm a physique coach. I was an in-person trainer for about a decade as well. I've been doing this for a very long time, just in terms of human performance optimization, physique athletes, everything across the board. And I also mentor other coaches as well and educate other coaches. And alongside with me today is Danielle Dooley. She is an IFBB pro. She is also a coach on the Saga team. My coaching brand is called Saga Coaching. And a fun announcement as well, just to throw this out there, is we have a new coach on board as well, Jacob Carmona. So you will be experiencing him on the podcast in the near future as well. So Danielle, say hello to everybody today and any opening remarks you might have.
Hello. And no, I don't think so. I'm just excited to get started talking on this topic.
Awesome. Yeah, today we are talking about, what it kind of looks like to be ready to compete in bodybuilding. So today is going to be a little bit more bodybuilding specific. We usually try to keep things kind of ambiguous. It's usually on, within the realm of physique enhancement and competitive bodybuilding, but we try to relate it to other areas of life as well. But today is going to be a little bit more bodybuilding centric. We're talking about what it looks like to be ready to compete, to go into a bodybuilding contest prep, and what divisions might suit you the best as well. We're going to go over bodybuilding division criteria, some of the other details in terms of what to expect, making sure that you're just aligned in terms of going into a bodybuilding contest prep, what all that entails, some expectations, that kind of stuff. We're just going to kind of let things flow a bit and chat about it. So Danielle, do you have anything specific, like maybe a few things off the top of your head that are included in things to have aligned going into the bodybuilding journey? It doesn't have to necessarily be the initiation of a contest prep, but just getting into bodybuilding in general as a competitive athlete. What are just a few things off the bat to expect?
Yeah, I think because where we're at with bodybuilding in the past couple of years has expanded so much, like social media, just like viewership, people, at least in our bubble, it seems like there's a lot more participants. So there's a lot more information out there on, what you need in order to be ready for a prep or just to get involved in bodybuilding. And that's something I wish back when I started there was. So I feel like I've picked up things along the way, but also just like experiencing the journey has given me a lot of insight into like what all, not just like one factor of like being able to go to the gym, but the mental side of things, the like your family relationship side of things, just how disciplined you are, how structured you're able to make your work life balance with it all. There's just so many different factors that go into it. And the more you can have that set up before you actually start your prep, the better your prep's going to be.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of things to get aligned, not only before you start a contest prep, but also just getting into bodybuilding in general. The mindset stuff of being able to find that balance, you're not going to truly understand the sacrifice and discipline that it requires until you actually get into it, right? But kind of reframing your mindset going into it from the get-go is probably a good strategy. Just understanding that it's going to be very, very time consuming. A lot of effort is going to be required. A lot of discipline, like you mentioned. You're going to have to do a lot of things when you don't feel like doing them, simply put, right? Balancing work-life stuff as well. So, we're balancing, your career, because you most likely have one of those as well. You might, have other means in terms of income, but balancing that as well as your personal relationships, whether you have a significant other, husband, wife, whether it's friendships, all these different things. Those are probably the primary things to take into consideration when getting into it in terms of navigation. And it's perfectly doable. Like, you can balance all these things. You can do all these things as well, but you just have to try to set realistic expectations for yourself heading into it setting the stage, lining up the stars to have success, and jumping into it thinking that it's just going to be like, oh, this new hobby that you're going to do and it's simple and it's like this little activity. It's not the case. It's a very, very uh, consuming, hobby to pursue, but it's a great hobby to pursue. And a lot of people enjoy it greatly and get a lot of fulfillment from it and are also able to accelerate their careers a lot from it as well. I know that I kind of failed to mention that on a recent podcast that we did in terms of like your why for bodybuilding, right? If you are, a coach, a personal trainer, you're involved in the industry in any capacity, you're looking for brand deals, there's a lot of things that can come along with it. Bodybuilding definitely helped propel my career as a coach and fitness professional in general. So, it's a great kind of lead by example. And then if you eventually coach other competitors too, or if that's something that you're wanting to pursue, having that hands-on experience of knowing what it's like in the trenches gives you a whole different perspective in terms of how you coach people. It allows you to be a little bit more stern about the things that you're having athletes do as well, knowing how important they are, and knowing that, you were able to get through that before. So, somebody else can get through it as well. And you've had your own struggles that you can relate to people with. It helps with empathy, it helps with a lot of things. So, having, those expectations out the gate is probably a good strategy. Then, like I mentioned, once you kind of jump into the sport and start the process, you start to learn a lot more. You know, the experience is invaluable. You're going to be able to learn a lot more just by actually doing it and understanding. But, wrapping your head around those things to begin with is really important. Now, one thing I wanted to mention that initially came to mind was also the financial side of things. And to preface this, Danielle and I are not financial advisors or financial professionals in any capacity, but we do understand the business side of things and we understand how expensive competing can be as well. So, competition prep is going to be relatively expensive depending on, your financial standing. And, the elephant in the room as well that I just haven't seen talked about much is just the fact that things are really expensive right now, just in general, right? It's what we could get by on, a decade, 2 decades ago is not the same thing as it is now. Everything's a little bit more expensive. Your general lifestyle just before you even go into competing is probably more expensive than it once was. And so, anticipating the fact that it is, going to have, a cost in terms of financial side of things too. So I wanted to talk about some specifics and some primary things. So what are some things off the top of your head, Danielle, that you can think of that are some of the most important things to maybe not spare any money on? That way people can kind of go into it with a realistic expectation of, and also financial budgeting as well, going into it to make sure that they're doing things appropriately and able to sustain the process as well.
Yeah. It's funny because we say how you were saying how much time and effort you put into bodybuilding, and it's like a lot of times I'll hear it as it's like your second job, and it kind of is, but it's also a job that you're not. Most majority people are not getting paid for. Maybe the top elite, but we are having to spend a lot of money for this job. But definitely, having your finances in order is a big thing. I would think kind of first things coming to mind, I see a lot of people that have multiple gym memberships, not necessary. You just need one gym membership. If you're someone that travels a lot, get a Planet Fitness membership. No, it's not the most like flashy thing, but you can go to different locations and you can get the job done. Uh, Getting a like Costco, Sam's Club membership, something like that, where you can buy food in bulk is going to save you down the road. Just getting the essentials. You don't need to get all the extras, like all the fancy like $10 condiments and the newest like cream of rice flavor that's triple, maybe even quadruple the amount of just a normal orange box cream of rice. So it's a lot of like the flashy stuff that you'll see. You don't, if you strip it down to what you really need, it's not necessary. When we're getting into like prep kind of things, there's definitely ways you can get around, borrowing. Like for female competitors, you can either rent your suit or borrow a suit from someone. Same thing with your heels, you might be able to borrow heels from someone. Tanning is kind of, iffy as far as if you're comfortable doing a DIY tan. So there's a lot of different ways you can save here and there, but you do have to be kind of smart about it with certain things.
100%. And, there's things that you don't necessarily want to, for a lack of a better term, cheap out on. Coaching is definitely going to be your primary thing that you want to focus on. And that's not to sell our own coaching. That's just in general, you want a really solid coach to guide you in the right directions. People that are self coached, it's doable. It's happened. I've self coached myself, but that was after, decades of building up knowledge and understanding and a lot of experience in the gym with my own nutrition, everything across the board. So, coaching is definitely something you don't want to try to cheap out on. I recommend hiring a good coach that also has your health as a top priority as well, because bodybuilding can have its negative health impacts as well. Making sure that somebody is monitoring that and, helping not necessarily repair, but helping the recovery after a show as well, making sure that somebody has a big emphasis on that and understands human physiology to that extent as well. That's really important. And posing coaching is going to be really important as well. You can be the best athlete on stage in terms of, conditioning, shape, size, all that kind of stuff. But if you can't present it well, then, the judges may not be able to see what you truly look like in terms of how impressive your physique is. And you can easily get knocked down positions if your posing is lacking as well. So coaching is going to be like probably the most important things for you. If you are somebody that is able to self coach, that's awesome, but posing coaching is going to be really important on that side too. I do not recommend just watching YouTube videos or anything of that sort. You need to have a posing coach on board, and you need to be working with them early on as well. I usually recommend 20 weeks out is when to start with a posing coach. You should be posing in the off season as well. You should already be practicing, experimenting with poses, getting a flow, getting your confidence in terms of footwork. If you're a female competitor, if you're not confident in walking in heels, that's something that you should work on as well. Being able to confidently strut your stuff in heels is going to be really important. That's going to be your foundation when it comes to posing as well. So if you can't confidently walk around in heels and stand in heels, then that's something you definitely need to work on. I've heard of competitors, wearing their heels when they're cooking in the house, like walking around in their heels. Those are good strategies. You should be focused on that heavily on the front end. Should not shy away from as far as expense goes either. So that's something to expect. Obviously, we have food that's going to be the primary expense probably. It's debatable whether at the end of the day, if you really like look at all the expenses, if which one's more expensive to be a bodybuilding competitor as far as food goes, or just laissez-faire, ordering food every once in a while, going out to eat. It's debatable which one's more expensive, but I would argue bodybuilding might be less expensive than that kind of lifestyle, depending on how much you're indulging or how much you're eating in general. So, food's still going to be an expense and something to account for at least. Danielle mentioned, borrowing suits, renting suits as well. That can be a good strategy, but I do recommend that you get a suit that you feel comfortable with as well. You feel confident in. You should be wearing something that allows you to like bring an aura to the stage. And sometimes if you're able to budget and to save up for that kind of thing, I do recommend getting a premium kind of suit. Toxic Angels is fantastic for females. There's a lot of brands. Classic Physique trunks and bodybuilding trunks are not very expensive, but still something to take into consideration here. And what are some other things that, PEDs, obviously, elephant in the room as well. If you're an enhanced athlete, those are going to be quite expensive and can total up to quite a bit. Blood work is going to be more important than the PEDs, right? So even if you're a natural athlete, we should be making sure that we have budgeted for truly comprehensive lab work and not just, going to your doctor and getting the typical CBC, CMP, TSH stuff. We want to have a more comprehensive panel. We need to see what's going on in terms of sex hormones, a lot of different stuff, cortisol rhythm. There's a lot of important aspects that a good coach is going to take into consideration heading into a prep and allow them to navigate it more appropriately. Make sure that you're even ready as far as your health goes heading into a contest prep, and then monitoring your health throughout the process and afterwards as well. So those are all things. Blood work should never be something that you avoid in terms of financial costs. So that needs to be on the forefront of your priorities, especially if your health is important to you, which I would assume most people it is, right? There's people that are like, whatever it takes kind of mentality. But even then, you don't want to just cause damage and harm that doesn't need to happen. It just simply doesn't. And even if you're pushing things to a really far extreme, like we can still mitigate harm and reduce harm in that process as well. So, Danielle, is there anything else that you can think of that's really important as far as cost within a contest prep?
I think if you're able to kind of outline those things, the like non-negotiables, your blood work, your coach, your posing, and then obviously things like your NPC card registration, like you're not going to be able to move around those kind of fees. You know, for females, hair and makeup, you can definitely practice that. And if you feel comfortable come show day, that can save you a good little chunk. Um, but again, those are like the show day fees. It's a one-time thing versus your big things like your blood work, your training, your gym membership, your food. Those are going to be the reoccurring things that you really need to try to figure out like the budget for the majority of your bodybuilding journey, not just your prep.
100%. Yeah. When you head into peak week, there's additional expenses. Danielle mentioned tanning. We have makeup. We have, if you're a female competitor, these are, you have your hair, you have nails, that kind of stuff as well to prepare for. There's jewelry involved in the female divisions as well. So, all things to take into consideration and to get a good idea of, I would recommend maybe reaching out to, if you have any friends that are competitors or seasoned competitors, reaching out to them, maybe asking what are some of the things to expect. You can ask your coach as well. I recommend that probably more. I have athletes ask me all the time, what's kind of like an overview of what I'm looking at expense wise. And I'll kind of break things down a little bit, explain like areas that they shouldn't kind of try to avoid in terms of financial costs and things that they can probably, find something a little bit more affordable in terms of certain things, like what to prioritize in terms of what not to cheap out on, like I said, lack of a better term there. But so that stuff's really important heading into bodybuilding. I think that the financial side of things is probably one of the most important things, if not the most important thing to understand getting into it, because if you're not expecting it and then all of a sudden you are under a bunch of financial stress that you didn't have prior to getting into bodybuilding, then that stress is going to accumulate and can definitely be relatively deleterious to your results as well. So if you're investing a lot, time, energy, discipline, financial side of things, putting a lot into bodybuilding, and then there's this underlying tone of stress because you're in over your head as far as expenses go, and you already have all these other things and tasks stacked on top of stress as well in terms of the tasks that are involved with bodybuilding, whether it's your training, your cardio, meal prep, all that kind of stuff. You definitely want to have a good expectation going into it and be well prepared financially as well. So, it's not fun when you get deep into bodybuilding and you're like, damn, I'm in over my head and I have all this stress and, I've seen athletes have to bail out of preps, all kinds of stuff. You do not want to bury yourself in debt or anything for bodybuilding, right? Like we want to be financially responsible going into it. So, that's partially why I recommend, not just that to get off of the financial topic. I don't want to like make anybody sad or anything, I mean, it's kind of like a downer, but moving away from that as well, just heading into it with a positive mindset. That's why I recommend athletes as well, getting started sooner than later and not just jumping into a contest prep, because, easing into things to some extent is a good strategy because you start to open your eyes in terms of what all is going to be involved. You get a good feeling for, finding that stability of what all the costs are looking like and stuff like that, anything that you weren't expecting, and, getting yourself to a good position mentally, physically, everything. In terms of your success as an athlete as well, if you want to win a show, over here at Saga Coaching, I always say that we don't compete to just participate, we compete to win. So, if you're investing all this time and effort and everything into bodybuilding, we want to have a positive outcome. A lot of people kind of forget that at the end of the day, this is competitive bodybuilding. We're competing. I know that it's tough getting up on stage and you're exposed to the judges and exposed to everybody else, maybe on social media, whatever it is. But you want to show up and you want to compete because that's what we're doing essentially, right? We don't want to think of it as like a participation contest. And that's not to say that, your first show, you're going to do extremely well or anything like that. It's just putting in a lot of effort and being determined to do well, at least relatively well. Maybe it doesn't necessarily look like just placing at your show. It can look like beating your last physique. It could look like losing 50 pounds within a contest prep, really stripping things down. That's a huge success and huge win. So there's a lot of wins outside of just the trophies, right? We've talked about that a lot, but you want to participate to win in some capacity, right? So That's really important. And setting yourself up for success leading up to that is really important. That's why I mentioned things like labs, getting your blood work pulled. If you're dealing with other potential functional health issues, we see things like all kinds of stuff. It could be thyroid issues that you're experiencing, gut issues, a lot of different things that we want to take into consideration. If it's I primarily see this with male athletes, but if you've been using PEDs in the past on your own and you haven't really, you aren't as knowledgeable or skillful, I will say, in terms of evaluating blood work and then making the right moves in terms of adjusting things to make sure that you're doing things appropriately as well. Those things can get kind of out of hand. So we want to look at those things too before we initiate a contest prep. If your blood work is a complete dumpster fire, then we want to evaluate those things and get them at better alignment at least before jumping into a contest prep or even an off-season phase where we're pushing the envelope as well. So if you are somebody that's thinking about competing and is listening to this, please get in and start the process earlier. Don't jump into a contest prep. Just because your friends are jumping into contest preps doesn't mean that you have to. I recommend spending some time with the coach, getting used to everything, getting up to speed on things. You most likely need more muscle. You need to have more muscle and you need to be leaner than you probably think you do. So that's where a coach is going to give you honest feedback as well. Like, hey, you need to be bigger and we're going to compete to, have a positive outcome, not just to do this for fun. Right. So, is there anything else you can think of heading into bodybuilding in general that people should have a solid expectation of in terms of what to expect? Or have we touched on a lot of the primary ones?
Yeah, a lot of the primary ones definitely to over prepare. I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast of just like over preparing. Like you never know what's going to pop up in your life, whether that's whatever phase that you're in. We've talked about like during a peak week and I had to buy an extra plane ticket because we flew to the wrong city, or, that's more on the financial side of things. But then you never know if your health, knock on wood, is going to take a turn and you have to reevaluate kind of your phasing, and you just never know. So always having more time, more preparedness for everything, your support system, making sure that you have a good support system, your lifestyle just in general is in place. If you are, you know, entering into like a new relationship or moving, new career, all of those things, those can not be great times to get into prep, especially if it's your first one, because you don't know what to expect. So that can definitely make a huge impact on how well your prep goes and your progress. Not to say that, it could be phenomenal, but just from my experience and what I've seen, that's not always the best combination.
Yeah, 100%. Those are good ones that I failed to mention as well. So, having stable relationships heading into a contest prep is going to be really important. That's why, again, I recommend, getting into the process of bodybuilding earlier instead of jumping into a contest prep. If you have a significant other that may not understand the lifestyle or maybe doesn't have any, they may be like fitness focused and stuff as well, but maybe they don't truly understand what all bodybuilding entails. They'll start to get a better grasp in terms of the tasks that you're going to have to do, what changes your lifestyle is going to have, because it is going to be a change for them as well. So you have to be empathetic. You have to ride that balance, because bodybuilding can be a very selfish sport, and it's not selfish in like a super negative way. It's just you have to focus on yourself all the time. Like you have to focus on your next meal, you're focused on getting to the gym, you're focused on things for yourself. So being able to start to navigate that more appropriately, making sure that you're balancing your relationships well. And, like I said, if you have a significant other, that's really important, because the last thing you want is your bodybuilding journey to be the end of things that are more important to you, right? There's other things that are more important than bodybuilding. You don't want, going through a breakup prior, like during or before a contest prep, is a really bad strategy. If you have a move that's scheduled, vacations that travel that's scheduled, you probably don't want to be in contest prep when those things happen. That's not to say that you can't do it. I've seen phenomenal athletes be able to take vacations during prep and stay on track, which is pretty impressive stuff. Me personally, whenever I was bodybuilding, whenever I would go into a contest prep, I made sure my calendar was completely clear, because all I was going to focus on was exactly that. I wasn't going to let anything distract me. And Danielle kind of mentioned like contingencies as well. So making sure you have some cushion room, but I'm big on like, no plan B kind of mindset too, blinders on, all in, burn the boats or whatever they say, that kind of stuff as well. But at the same time, you want to have some cushion room, especially like financially and stuff as well. Like I said, we're not financial advisors, but it's kind of like owning a car, right? You want to keep a little bit of money aside for like repairs, oil changes, that kind of stuff, right? It's similar to that. So, keeping that mindset of being locked in and having that focus, but having some wiggle room in terms of being able to pivot, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. Athletes that are fantastic are going to be ones that are able to pivot well and be able to adjust and to steer the ship in the right directions. Or, I mean, it's kind of our job as coaches to steer the ship, but weather the storm. If you're a crew member on the ship or first mate, whatever you want to call it, but navigating the storms, being able to make the right calls, and it's not a linear process either. So the expectation of it's just going to be straight progress the entire time, or you're not going to have obstacles in the way, or there's not going to be time where things don't go your way. Like those are all things that are going to happen, and you have to be able to navigate through that. And I've talked about this before quite a bit as well, but just the emotional intelligence side of things is really important here. So if you're somebody that breaks down easily, or has like it gets really panicky, or freaks out pretty easily, or gets really overstimulated, I would again ease into bodybuilding and get used to it and make sure that you can handle it mentally. There's nothing wrong with that. Another thing to mention here too is if you have a history of pushing your body to extremes as well. Like if you're getting into bodybuilding and you've been in other athletics and you've really pushed your body to extremes, that's something to expect in terms of like echo of that. That could be a positive or a negative thing. Sometimes athletes coming in from other sports, it helps like mentally sometimes in terms of discipline, consistency, showing up to practice, like, and as a metaphor to like checking in, that kind of stuff, showing up to the gym, whatever that looks like. But, it can help with the mental side of things. But also if you've put your body through, you know, abuse, for the a lack of a better word, in terms of like injuries, or, you've really torn your body down hormonally as well. Those are things to look at. And that's why blood work can be really important. So there can be positives and negatives. I see some athletes that I get are ex-military as well, and they seem to do really well, like ex-Marines and stuff. Mentally, they just have that discipline and that trust, and they just get after it regardless of anything, and they're kind of unwavering. So building that mental side of things and that mental fortitude and that stability heading into a contest prep is going to be pretty important, not just contest prep, but just the entire process, right? So is there anything else you can think of before we kind of shift gears into talking about different divisions, criteria, what that might look like, weight caps, anything else?
No, I think just my stance overall is like, for the most part, being ready for, whatever phase that is. For the most part, we're like talking about being ready for prep. But I feel like you do have that sense of like being ready. Like most of these areas are lined up. Whereas I can think of some periods of my life where the things that were going on, whether it was like new career, new city, new whatever, if I had tried to be in a like prep phase, it would have been a dumpster fire. And we say, like there's no perfect time. And that's true. There is no perfect time. There's never been a perfect time when I went into prep, but I was in a much better spot with all these things that we've talked about in order to have a successful prep. Whereas like if I was in those really like tough spots, I would have just been setting myself up for failure. So you do kind of have this sense of like feeling like you're ready, like you're as set up for success as possible because I have these areas of my life lined up.
Yeah, 100%. So to sum things up a little bit, just writing that midline of, you know, there is no perfect time, but also making sure that the stars are aligned appropriately. Just the primary, like really important stuff. So we have, your health, making sure that we're pulling labs, making sure that you have a good coach on board, making sure that you have a good relationship with that coach and things are running smoothly. You know, not it's not that sometimes like you just may not mesh with the coach, and that's perfectly fine. You may need to look around a little bit and find the right coach for you, and that's perfectly fine and reasonable. So finding the right coach to be working with, making sure that posing is a top priority. If you're going to be doing this, making sure that finances are aligned, making sure relationships are in a good place, making sure that you don't have any big life events that are pretty disruptive happening within contest prep is going to be important, and making sure that your mindset's in a good place as well. So these are things to expect, things to line up. Make sure you're kind of, for lack of a better term, again, like easing into things a bit in terms of getting up to speed on stuff, probably running through some level of off season or improvement phase, making sure that your health's in a good spot, making sure that everything is kind of calibrated. The other thing, just one final thought, is that the longer you work with the coach before contest prep, the better of a gauge they have for how to execute that contest prep as well. So the more data they can collect, the more they know how your body responds to specific things. It could be food, training, PEDs, supplementation, what your labs are looking like, how your labs have changed over time. The more data a coach can accumulate, the better they can execute a contest prep for you as well. So it's all things to take into consideration. But that kind of sums things up, and we'll shift gears into understanding the different divisions, what they look like, what they kind of entail in terms of criteria, how they've changed over time as well. I think that that's important to note. And bodybuilding right now, in my opinion, is more competitive than it's ever been. The physiques that are coming to stage, not only at pretty much every level, NPC, let's preface this as well. We're talking about NPC and IFBB. We're not going to talk about any other federations today. So in the NPC, even at the regional level, it's more and more competitive than I've ever seen before. Some shows, like number of competitors, may be a little bit smaller, and it's kind of hit or miss in terms of competitiveness as well. But I would say, generally speaking, athletes are bringing their best. There's athletes that may not have competed in the past are now competing. There's athletes that are, because of the rise of social media and everything as well. There's influencers that have really impressive physiques that have been able to build a following because their physique's really impressive already. They have fantastic genetics, whatever it may be, and they transfer into bodybuilding. So there's more and more competitive physiques coming in at every level, at the entry level, at the national level, and at the pro level. So Danielle, in terms of the female divisions, let's kind of run through that. And we'll start from the bottom with Fit Model and work our way up. Model.
So Fit Model is obviously the newest division that was added to NPC last year in 2025. Big things to note with that one is there's no crossovers. So it's like the only division that doesn't allow crossovers. So you can't compete in Fit Model and in Bikini and be like, I don't know which one I want to be, so I'm going to do both. No, you have to pick one or the other. Now you could compete in a Fit Model division in one show, and then maybe the next weekend you go and compete in Bikini, and that's definitely an option. But within the same show, you can't compete in Fit Model and Bikini or any other division for that matter. And then with Fit Model, it's also a little bit different in their suits, that they are to be a plain color. It has to be like a spandex or metallic material. And then, but there's no like stones, no crystals, no sequins, which all of the other divisions you'll see that. Even like the connectors that you'll see on the tops and the bottoms, those aren't allowed. They have to be just that metallic or spandex material. It's a little bit more of a moderate coverage as well. So this is for all the divisions. There's no like thongs, but you can't have like the V shape in the front. There's no ties on the sides either. And then it's a two-piece bikini. But this is going to be the division that's primarily for less muscle than bikini. So maybe a more amateur, newer to, I wouldn't say like you've never been in the gym before. Obviously, you do have to have muscle, but not as musculature. I don't know if that's the right word. Not as much muscle as bikini. They're still looking for balanced proportions. They're still looking at your stage presence. They're still looking at that you overall look like lean and healthy, but there's not like an extreme conditioning to it. They're not looking at like tie-ins or anything like that. So it might be someone that's more of a first-time competitor, or maybe a lot of times, especially now, we're seeing pros and even like Olympians that were in bikini and they're just not wanting to be that big anymore. Not to say, bikini is big, but they're not wanting that much muscle and they're moving down to, not down, but moving to the Fit Model division to have more of that kind of that look. So those I think are the big things for fit model.
Yeah, Fit Model's a newer division, and to essentially the intention behind it was to bring back what bikini used to look like. And Fit Model and any new division that comes about, it's interesting to observe because it evolves over time. Whenever they bring in a new division, they kind of set a standard and then it kind of evolves as it goes. And Fit Model's been interesting to watch. I believe this is the first year where they're having it at the Olympia and are having all the pro shows and stuff. So we have a lot of new pro fit model, and it's been interesting to see how that's kind of played out. They are a bit more muscular than I think they originally intended for them to be at the pro level. Now, it's not to say in terms of conditioning, like they're definitely keeping that at bay. I think that there's a fullness to it. There's more of a smoother look to it, for a lack of a better word. There's not like no hardness, graininess, vascularity, that kind of stuff. But I do think after, and this isn't to get off topic into bikini, but I do think after they've brought in Fit Model, I feel like bikini's conditioning has gotten a little bit more aggressive. But the struggle with bikini and Fit Model, primarily like with both these divisions, is that I've struggled with this in the past. And to preface this as well, I've coached bikini athletes at the highest level. I put an athlete on the Olympia stage, multiple pro wins, etc. And the judging criteria kind of is a little bit shifty. It's a lot more shifty than it is in other divisions, where it's just like conditioning, size, like shape, all that kind of stuff is more kind of just a little bit more rock solid in terms of what they're looking for. Bikini and fit model is going to like vary a little bit more depending on who shows up that day, what the conditioning looks like with the other contestants as well. So it's going to be interesting to watch fit model evolve over time. But if you are a fit model competitor or looking to do bikini, I recommend working with Danielle over myself. I worked with a fit model athlete and she looked fantastic, but I like conditioning, so I'm going to push it there. And it's not a division where I have to like purposefully make somebody less conditioned is not really something I'm looking to do. So but Danielle does a fantastic job with, fit model, bikini, any of those divisions as well. So I think that kind of sums up fit model for the most part. It's a newer division. It's going to evolve over time. So pay attention to what's happening at the pro level, what's being awarded. Again, anticipate that the judging may be a little bit shifty. You may be bringing a package that you think the judges are looking for, and it may not be what they were looking for that day. And you're going to hear that kind of terminology a lot more with fit model and bikini than you're going to hear with any other division we talk about today. So just to kind of set the stage for that, a little bit fuller of a look, smoother of a look, less conditioned, a decent amount of muscularity. It's not like you can get away with just not being muscular at all in terms of fit model, especially if you're wanting to be really competitive and turn pro and that kind of stuff. So just keep an eye on how it continues to develop. When wellness was introduced, it was something entirely different than it is now. When men's physique was introduced, it was something entirely different than it is now. So watch as it evolves over time. Pay attention to the pro level, the national level, the amateur level, just kind of get a better idea. If you're a coach listening to this as well, pay close attention. If these are divisions that you're wanting to really focus on as a coach, then study it, watch how it adapts over time, pay attention to that stuff. But that kind of sums up fit model. Anything else come to mind for fit model?
Yeah, no, just what you said. Fit model, I think, definitely got a lot of heat in the beginning because it was like, what is this for? Like, we're bodybuilding, we're supposed to be growing. But now, when we, like you said, when you compare it to what bikini was, like, bikini has grown so much. And so, that is one other factor to keep in mind if you are interested in getting into bodybuilding, that the health component, as far as like PEDs, what you may have to take for some of these divisions, fit model is going to be the, lowest barrier to entry. So not going to have as many, health risks associated with that division either. But yeah.
100%. Now, moving into bikini, what are we looking at here?
So where bikini is now, just like you mentioned, it's evolved quite a bit, but the big thing being shape. And just like you mentioned, every show that you go to, the whoever's judging it's gonna be what their preference is. But overall shape, round glutes. I feel like anytime I've heard a bikini competitor get feedback, it's glutes. Like, you know, come in with bigger glutes, or sometimes it's the conditioning as well. So You're wanting a small waist, obviously a feminine look. I think stage presence, their flow, their sass on stage is a big portion of it as well. The way that they're able to present their physique with, I don't know if I mentioned this with Fit Model, there's just the front and back pose. Similar with Bikini, there's the front and back pose, but typically they'll also have like the walk to the back and then turn around and walk to the front. So they're actually seeing, are you dropping your glutes while you're walking? Things like that. And then different than Fit Model, now we have the more typical two-piece bikini that does have the rhinestones with that. Yeah, main thing I think I always hear, like I said, is just like the strong stage presence, being able to have like really good glute development. And I think also a lot of times what I'll hear is and see is that bikini competitors will need to potentially bring down their quads if they're very like quad dominant. So just kind of keeping that in mind. But bikini is definitely one of, a lot of times we'll see it as an easy division, but it's difficult in the sense that there's a lot of competitors that will be in that division. And then it's a very, depending on the day, depending on who shows up, depending on what the judges prefer, it's going to be difficult to make that decision as the who's number one that day. Subjective.
100%. Yeah, with bikini, it's always like you need more and more and more, and then it's too much, and then you like the judges' feedback's always going to be like you need more of this and less of this, more of this and less of that. And I mean that can be feedback in any division sometimes, but with bikini, it's going to be a big portion of it is just that X frame, big round full glutes with a good kind of teardrop look to them as well in terms of leanness, without being too lean. They don't want you super vascular, they don't want to see striations necessarily. So it's riding that balance of conditioning, fullness. Shoulders, they want a developed upper body where it's very balanced with the lower body, but they don't want it overdeveloped. They don't want you to have sharp lines in the shoulders. They don't want you to have like cap delts. They want a smoother kind of rounder look to the delts as well, with an adequate amount of mass that kind of balances out that upper and lower body as well. They don't want you to be dominant in the lower half, and they don't want you to be dominant in the upper half. There has to be a good balance there. And quads, like you mentioned, overdeveloped quads can be counted down. They want a little bit more of a straight line there in the quads, big popping glutes, shoulders to balance things out, lats. Like I said, that X frame without it being too much. And the conditioning really shifts over time. I've observed pretty closely in terms of the judges trying to pull back on the conditioning, and like it's like this back and forth sort of thing, because the competitors at the bikini level are, like you said, there's a ton of competitors that are doing it. It's a very popular division, and these girls really want to win. These girls get really competitive with bikini, and at the national level, even at the regional level, and especially at the pro level. So these girls are pushing it further and further and further, and they're having to judge who shows up that day. And if they've all been just pushing hard and pushing the limits of what they can bring, they're judging based on that. So it's really hard. And then at the Olympia, they'll sometimes award a little bit less conditioned look, for example, to try to set the standard and pull that back a little bit. So it's like this kind of waxing and waning process that you've seen, but at the end of the day, it's bodybuilding. So we're always pushing the envelope of stuff. So it kind of just gradually gets more extreme. Like we've watched bikini get more and more muscular, more and more conditioned over time. And they've tried to pull back on that every once in a while to like set a different standard. But that's what I mean when I mention that, these divisions develop over time and evolve over time. And it's not necessarily good or inherently good or bad thing. It's what it is. Bodybuilding is an extreme sport. We're pushing the body to extremes. We're bringing looks that are extremes, and that envelope's going to keep getting pushed over time. So that's just how that works. Bikini's a lot of fun though, and like you mentioned, the sass, the stage presence becomes a little bit more important with this division, bringing a lot of just charm to stage, and that kind of stuff can be really important. Bikini, I would recommend, like with the first half of this podcast, talking about expectations in terms of expenses and stuff like that. Bikini is going to be where, and Fit Model as well, and some of these other female divisions are going to be where you want to make sure that you're, you know, putting enough effort and, keeping enough budgeted for like the pageantry side of things, right? they want you to bring like a glammed look to stage. They love that. Especially as you get higher and higher, they want more and more glam. So, you may want to, budget and put money aside for hiring a makeup artist and like getting your hair professionally done, potentially getting extensions, like all that kind of stuff. The hair, the makeup, and that kind of stuff becomes more and more important. I would say primarily bikini. I could be wrong though. Like I said, I haven't been as involved in these divisions as I once was, but those are things to focus on in terms of bringing to stage. That presence, the posing, the ability to strut your stuff in heels, that kind of stuff is going to be more important than these divisions. Now, moving up the line, we have like 3 to 4 other divisions. We'll probably stay away from female bodybuilding just because we don't really coach any of those athletes. That's not to say that we can't touch on it a little bit, but this is where it gets a little bit tricky because we brought in wellness. Wellness was above bikini, right? And wellness was like originally was for the ladies that were a little bit more lower body dominant, right? You would have bikini, like I mentioned, we want a more balanced upper lower kind of physique where it's very balanced. Everything's about balance than bikini. And then wellness was brought in, the intention, I believe, was for the ladies that had more muscularity down below and had a tougher time bringing up the upper body or bringing down the lower body to match that balance, right? So that's how it kind of initially came into existence. And now it's pretty damn extreme. Like it's very muscular. I would put it above women's figure in terms of muscularity, conditioning, and stuff. It's probably closer to women's physique, and a lot of women's physique athletes ended up moving into wellness and vice versa. So, and then in terms of like PED usage and stuff like that, I would argue that wellness is probably closer related to women's physique than women's figure. So let's move on to women's figure, and then we'll touch on wellness. How does that sound?
Yeah. So you said move on to figure.
Yeah, we're going to talk
Yeah.
about figure,
Yeah.
which is Danielle's
Same.
Danielle's division, and it's my favorite female division. I must say, I love the figure division. I think that it's awesome, but I'll let Danielle talk about it a little bit more first.
Yes. So that kind of gets into like when you're choosing the right division for you, and we haven't really touched on all of those things, but those are the people I was like looking at when I was getting into figure was like Nicole Wilkins, and then like Sid Gillen when we were like moving on into the following years. But with figure, we're looking for yes the X frame, but like primarily now where we weren't with fit model or bikini or wellness. Looking at the like upper body now we're looking for a really like well developed back, a strong V taper, but you do have to have balanced legs as well. I know I've heard it, like discussed as the martini glass to an extent, yes, but I do think like the legs are a really big part of figure as well. But they're just like you mentioned, they're not going to be quite as like big as wellness. With figure, we have quarter turns, so we'll do front side, back side, not any kind of like bodybuilding poses. We are still in heels. We have the a little bit different than the other divisions we recently talked about is the cross back suit, so you wouldn't be wearing the same if you were going to do bikini and figure and try to figure out where your place was in bodybuilding. You'd have to get two different suits, so kind of keep that in mind too. But yeah, that's the big thing. I think just like we mentioned with bikini, figure has grown a lot in the last 10 years or so, where as far as like pushing the line
Mhm.
with conditioning, with like how big and how like grainy you are. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen like a big shift in that, and so it'll be interesting to see this year who they award at the Olympia. As far and like what type of physique they award now that Sid has retired. So yeah, someone that probably has like wider clavicles is going to be more ideal to have that like wide upper body. But someone that I think has had like an athletic background is probably going to be more ideal. You have like stronger upper body genetics. A lot of times, it's figure is tough because women typically don't have that upper body like strength quite yet, unless you've been training for a long time or you've been working on your upper body strength, but overall, we do have to have that symmetrical muscular development.
100%. Yeah, figure is going to be definitely more muscular than bikini. And those the front shot, like the poses in terms of just being dead on, like front squared up, right? Shoulders. It's going to show the muscularity a lot more in terms of X frame, that V taper that you mentioned as well. Bikinis, the front pose is going to be side angled essentially from the side, right? So with figure, we're opening up and showing the entire physique a little bit more in terms of size and shape. Now with women's figure, I would say that it's a little bit closer. If I had to like relate it to like a men's division, I would probably say closer to like classic physique, where you can get away with like size matters, but it doesn't matter as much as like your general shape, right? So like, you look at classic, for example, and you have like Terrence Ruffin, or you have, some of the shorter guys that may not be pushing the size quite as far, but they just have that shape and that structure and really small waist, and they get awarded for it, right? It's not always a size game. And I would say that figure is similar in that regard. At the pro level, obviously, they're pushing more muscularity. And in order to have that level of conditioning as well, you have to have that muscle maturity and that muscle that's sitting there well on your physique in order to reach that level of conditioning that is required for it as well. But it's more about that's why they call it like figure, right? It's about the shape, it's about the structure, and that's where it can become a little bit more important. And we're going to get into genetic components here after we talk about each division and kind of what divisions will suit individuals a little bit better as well. But this will start to give you a little bit idea in terms of framing that as well. So figure is awesome. I think that it's a great division, and I encourage more women to aspire to be in the figure division as well. I think that it's fantastic. And it is like the envelope's always going to get pushed when it comes to bodybuilding. Like it's just any division you're in, it's going to be pushed to some extent. And figure, if you have the build and the structure and everything for it, and you like being a little bit more muscular, I think that it's a great competitive division to be in. And I love the fact that we can push the conditioning, we can bring a really impressive package, and also keep that femininity as well. That's going to be an overarching theme here as well when it comes to the female divisions in terms of wanting to keep your femininity. And we'll talk about that after we discuss all these divisions as well. So moving into wellness, let's talk about wellness.
Um, so wellness, we kind of touched on a little bit, but almost the opposite of figure in that instead of like focusing on a lot of the upper body and the back, you're focusing a lot more on a lower body dominant body features. So large glutes, full hamstrings. You do have to have developed quads, even though I have heard, I guess, just a big, not a big, but a lot of female competitors I've heard in the wellness division are even having to like reduce their quads because they do have such developed quads, almost always having to continue to work on glutes and hamstrings. But again, just overall, your just lower body has to be more dominant than your upper body. Not to say that some of our wellness competitors are still working on their upper body, right? They still have to have that kind of like conditioning in their upper body, but lower body is the primary like thing that we want to focus on. A small waist, feminine, still with their presentation. One, I guess, thing I see with presentation is like bikini and wellness are very similar in the like sass and like fire on stage, whereas figure I don't see that as much. It's a little bit more of like an elegant look. Not that those other divisions aren't elegant, but they typically tend to bring a little bit more sass to the stage. And then with wellness, I think when it first was introduced, now it was first originated in Brazil, right? And when it first came to the US, I think we primarily just saw a lot of competitors with like heavier lower body, but not necessarily like the conditioning or the muscle. They weren't in that kind of shape, so they don't want to see muscle separation. But I do think, kind of what you mentioned in wellness, it's going to be comparative to women's physique, like they need that conditioning, but that's a part of the like filling out process before a show, you know? So yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think what I haven't touched on. They won't have the crossback suits, so two piece for their suits. Similar posing in that into bikini in that they do a front pose and a rear pose and they'll walk back and walk forward. But yeah, that's
They do a quarter turn as well, I believe.
okay.
Yeah, so they do front pose, quarter turn, and then back pose. Wellness has definitely gotten more competitive over time, and the muscularity and conditioning is entirely different than it started out as. It's gotten more and more extreme. So wellness has been fun to watch, though. It's like I said, it's really competitive. A lot of women gravitate towards doing wellness as well. Like we mentioned, like conditioning and size is probably more comparable to women's physique at this point in terms of extremes. So it will probably continue to evolve over time. We'll see how it plays out. My first overall that I ever got as a coach was in the wellness division. I don't know if you knew that, but in the division, it was right when wellness started essentially. So I've kind of seen where it started and where it is now, and it's entirely different thing. But the wellness division is cool and it's fun. And if it's something that you gravitate towards, then go all in. And there's a lot of great wellness coaches out there. Danielle's happy to take on wellness clients as well. So, get after it. We love it. Now, moving on to women's physique. What's that looking like?
So we're moving up on kind of the muscularity chain. So women's physique was created to align with women's bodybuilding, but without the expectation of having that kind of size that women bodybuilders had. So they still have a lot more muscularity than all of the other divisions that we've been talking about. They have a very athletic appearance. Conditioning's a big portion for women's physique. They still have shape, they still have symmetry, but it's just not as much muscularity as women's bodybuilding. So it's more of an emphasis on the aesthetics rather than like the size. So if you're someone that really loves like training hard, and when we get in talk a little bit more about genetics, maybe you put on muscle a little bit easier than other women. So you have to be equally strong upper body and lower body with your development. And then this division is going to be one where you do have a posing routine, whereas the other divisions we've talked about just have poses. This is where you'll have like an actual routine that you have to hit certain poses within that routine, but they will also have for their like mandatories will have more strict poses or something like more comparable to like men's division poses. They'll do like the front double bi, back double bi, but they have the open hands, so that's a little bit different. Yes, the finger guns, side tricep with one leg extended, side chest with both arms extended, and then your ab and thigh. So just like within those poses, they're similar to bodybuilding, but they're like almost made to feel like a little bit more feminized. So I think this is like, I think that women's physique is a really fun division to watch because you have that posing routine, but then you're also just like in awe about like how much muscle some of these ladies have put on, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and how they display their physique.
100%. Yeah. Women's physique is awesome. And that's where when the heels come off as well. So the women's physique does not wear heels. They're more flat footed. If I had to relate women's physique to like a male division, I would probably say it's closer to like 212 or like middleweight bodybuilding, if that makes sense. So a little bit sized down from like the super heavies or open bodybuilding at the pro level. The aesthetics are important, the shape, the size, the conditioning. You're hitting more bodybuilding style poses, etc. So it's definitely a step up from figure as far as all of that goes as well. And size becomes a little bit more important. I mentioned that figure, shape, you can get away with maybe a little bit less size if you have really good shape and structure. Women's physique is where size probably becomes a little bit more of a priority in terms of a general muscularity, and they're going to be judging on that a little bit more as well. And then honorable mention, we'll mention women's bodybuilding as well. Essentially pretty closely related to women's physique, just much larger, like muscularity, more conditioned, etc. So that's going to be like men's open bodybuilding in the women kind of realm. So, but I think that covers most. Do we have anything else?
So women's physique and women's bodybuilding, they both have the crossback suits similar to
Yes.
figure as well. A little bit of different posing with women's bodybuilding, but same thing. They won't wear the heels and they have the routine. Those are those two. And then the one that typically gets unfortunately forgotten because it is one that's been around for a while is fitness.
Oh man,
Yes.
how do we miss that? No, I love fitness. I think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like women's bodybuilding and fitness typically when you go to at least like regional shows, those are going to be the smaller amount of people competing, just kind of like based on with women's bodybuilding again, just the criteria that it entails, and then with fitness, I think because maybe just the hype of other divisions, but then I feel like even just like personally, I always thought there was this kind of like I don't know if stigma or stereotype that you had to be like a gymnast, like an elite gymnast to be a figure competitor. And when I looked at what the actual mandatories were for the fitness routine, it's a push up of any kind, a high kick, a straddle hold, and a side split. So you can be a gymnast, a dancer, a cheerleader, an acrobat, or just like have general sports like background and you can compete in fitness. Like you can easily put together a routine. Now, the routine is 2/3 of your score. So that is the primary portion of it. And then the other third is going to be very similar to figure in that you have your figure suit, you do your quarter turns, and they're judging you very similar to what figure is being judged on. Uh, so you do want to rely heavily on that routine, but that's not to say if you're someone that's kind of close to a figure physique and you have that kind of background, I think figure could I'm not sorry not figure I think fitness could be a really good division to look into.
100%. Yeah. Women's fitness is awesome. The routines are so very entertaining. I love that they're always themed and all that kind of stuff. The Olympia level routines are always super entertaining to watch and a lot of fun. So yeah, it's super impressive what they can do on stage as well, just with that level of muscularity and being conditioned and prepared to show their physique on stage and be judged with their physique and being able to do, all kinds of tumbles and, all those other things that they're doing, acrobatic kind of stuff on stage. It's a lot of fun to watch and pretty impressive. So, and then obviously their physiques are going to be closely related to what we're looking at with figure. And there's crossover too. There's athletes that have done both or went back and forth doing both divisions as well. So, but I think that covers everything, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll move on to the men's side of things. Now, we'll start with men's physique first and foremost. That's the newest division that the men's has. We don't have fit model men yet, but we may someday. I don't know. But men's physique, we'll start with that. Now, debatably too, with in terms of muscularity, because I kind of like slid wellness like up above figure, right? The men's physique guys have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So they placed a weight cap on the pro men's physique athletes in recent years. Prior to that, there was no weight cap. I do not believe that there's a weight cap at the amateur level. I'm pretty confident on that. But they have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And now they're judging legs to an extent as well. So, you have to at least have some level of muscularity in your legs and kind of fill out your board shorts a little bit as well. You can't just come with stick legs like they used to. So men's physique has evolved over time, just like we mentioned that these other divisions evolve over time. Men's physique has evolved and it's similar with bikini where they've kind of like brought things back a little bit or tried to pull back a little bit in terms of like size and stuff. Ryan Terry is a good example of that because he's been awarded and he isn't necessarily the biggest guy on stage, but he definitely has the most gorgeous physique on stage. So that's really important. Now, men's physique kind of came into fruition as more of a like the fitness model, cover model, like kind of look, right? Like you're on a beach, you're chilling, you have the washboard abs, broad shoulders. Like that was the idea with men's physique. And it's, like I said, it's evolved a lot over time. The first two shows that I did personally was men's physique as well. And that was earlier on when men's physique was younger. I think it had been around for maybe 3 years by the time I first competed with my first show. So it's about, you have the board shorts. So In terms of suit, you're going to have like board shorts that kind of come up above the knee just a little bit. That's kind of the look. You're not, lower body isn't necessarily exposed. And then you have a front and a back pose. So you have your front pose and you have your back pose. Men's physique is really about that V taper. It's about having a really small waist. It's about having great abs, separation in those abs as well, like definition, intercostals, obliques, everything is like really shredded, small waist, really broad shoulders, big lats, big shoulders, big chests, like all that kind of stuff, just creating a really, really intense V taper. And then being able to display it really well as well, being able to twist a little bit in the waist and get those shoulders really broad. That's kind of what men's physique entails. So you're going to have the front pose, the back pose. Back pose is going to be just like a really big lat spread essentially for the most part, with hands down. Your hands aren't going to be on your hips, spreading apart with your elbows forward like you would see in classic physique or bodybuilding divisions. But, you know, it's like opened up, and then the front is you're opened up as well, just showing a really small waist. So structurally, it's really important to have a small waist, really broad shoulders, have that more of like a beach boy kind of look, right? This is where like more of the prettier guys with more of like a stone cold like model face are going to be, right? And that's not to say that we don't see that in other divisions as well, but men's physique is a little bit more, I would relate it to like bikini, all that kind of stuff. Presentation is really important. Bringing that aura, that confidence to stage, you know, posing has developed a lot over time in this division as well, in terms of what it looks like, how, you know, certain like transitions and stuff that they're utilizing, they're showing a lot of finesse and swag to their posing, right? So that's important. We're going to talk about the importance of posing is kind of across the board, but men's physique is unique in that regard, in terms of not showing the lower body. And then just presentation is a little bit different than these other divisions. Like I said, it's gotten a little bit out of hand in terms of muscularity. I think that they're kind of like bringing it back into a position where it's really about the aesthetics, you know? So, but yeah, I think that pretty much covers men's physique. It gets really competitive. There's a lot of fantastic men's physique athletes at the pro level. There's a lot of that have been successful that really bring like like just old school bodybuilding kind of mentality towards training and nutrition stuff as well. So it's not to say that like men's physique isn't, you know, any different in terms of intensity from these other divisions, except for maybe muscularity, conditioning, just a little bit, that kind of stuff. So very competitive, especially at the pro level. They get pretty intense, a little bit more shit talking at the pro level as well, which is kind of fun to watch. A little bit closer related to like what you would see in like the UFC, I guess you could say, in terms of press conferences and stuff. But it's fun. I've always liked watching men's physique, and it was the initial division that I gravitated towards. So a lot of fun there. Moving along, we have classic physique. So classic physique is a newer division as well. Did I say men's physique was the newest division? Classic physique is the newest division. So that came about after men's physique. So classic physique came into existence for the purpose of bringing back the older school bodybuilding look. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, Frank Zane, like that just classic look where it's about the aesthetics, it's about the small waist, it's about the posing, it's about the beauty and the artistry of bodybuilding. So that's where classic physique came into play. You know, the bodybuilding divisions got more and more extreme in terms of muscularity, conditioning, just pushing things to a high level. And so bringing classic physique in was to just reassert that beauty and that artistry within bodybuilding, in terms of just a lot of emphasis on posing. So like being able to pose really well is important. We have different poses here as well. So I mentioned men's physique has front and back. Classic physique is going to have pretty much all of the bodybuilding poses except for front and back lat spread. And we have a favorite classic pose instead of most muscular. So that's the difference with posing. We have all the other standard bodybuilding poses. So you have your quarter turns, you have your front double, back double, side chest as well. Side tricep can get tossed in as well, and all of that. It's not to say that you can't do front and back lat spreads in your posing routine and stuff like that, or maybe throw it in when you're just kind of showing off, but the mandatory poses are that. So the trunks are a little bit more coverage than you would see in open bodybuilding, although I like to have my athletes like hike up their trunks a little bit more, because we're usually coming to stage with some pretty striated glutes and we want to show that off. But same thing with men's physique, where the posing's got a lot of swag, you got a lot of stage presence. It's a little bit more like, maybe not as much of like a pretty guy look as men's physique, but you know, a little bit more of like a pretty guy look in relation to like bodybuilding. So, you know, bringing that swag, the posing, all that kind of stuff is really important. Stage presence. the artistry of the posing. Now, there are weight caps involved in classic physique as well. So that helps keep the muscularity at bay. Now, we've talked about how other divisions have evolved over time. And I think that weight caps are a great way to mitigate that. So they've done that with men's physique, for example, slapping some weight caps on the pro level so that they keep the muscularity at bay. And there's like only a limited amount of muscularity you can bring to stage. Classic physique has those weight caps as well. Not the same weight caps, but different weight caps. Now, your weight caps are going to be based on your height. So you're going to measure into your height, and then based on your height, you have a specific weight cap. So you cannot weigh in. Typically, it's like the day before the show. You're going to go to a weigh in and have to weigh in. Now, there's ways to like squeeze into weight caps. I've definitely done that with multiple athletes, making sure that we get weight, like make weight and then fill out. So you can that's a way to like bring as much muscularity as possible to the division. Now, with classic physique and men's physique, like I've mentioned, like muscularity is going to be, and size is going to be a little bit less important than it is in the 212 open bodybuilding, that kind of stuff as well. So like I said, shape, structure is really important here. Really small waist, presenting it well, having that beauty in the physique and that aesthetic in the physique is what's important for classic physique. And that's not to say that we're not going to see that at the bodybuilding level, because we still do as well. Moving along from that, we have 212 as well, but 212 is exclusively to the pro level. So 212, it's exactly what you would assume. The weight cap is 212 pounds. This is for, essentially bodybuilders that I would say are in between open and classic physique in terms of size and structure. There's a lot of aesthetic to this division as well. We've seen some very, very, very pretty physiques in the 212 division over the decades. So like Flex Lewis is just an absolute legend and has one of the greatest bodybuilding physiques of all time. So I think 212 sometimes gets a little bit forgotten about to some extent. I don't think nearly as much as some other divisions may get kind of forgotten about, but I love the 212 division. I love the athletes that are involved in it as well. Some of them cross over from 212 to open as well when their size just is really pushing the limits, and then they grow a little bit more. We've seen Derek Lunsford do that, move from 212 to open bodybuilding, and then obviously Mr. Olympia status as an open bodybuilder as well. So we've seen transitions from these divisions, as well as from classic into 212 as well. So there's a lot of like kind of not necessarily crossover, but being able to move into these divisions as you gain more muscularity or find where your positioning is. Now, moving into bodybuilding, essentially 212 is bodybuilding, but it's just weight capped and a little bit smaller size wise. And then open bodybuilding at the pro level, like I said, 212 is exclusive to the pro level. The reason that I hit that first is because bodybuilding at the amateur level has multiple classes that you can compete in. At the pro level, we only have open bodybuilding. That's it. So you just compete as open bodybuilder. There's no weight caps. There's no like specific classes within that to break that down. So we'll start with amateur level bodybuilding. Amateur level bodybuilding is going to have weight classes. So we have I may have missed some of these here, but we have I think like bantamweight, we have lightweight, we have middleweight, we have light heavyweight, we have heavyweight, and then we have super heavyweight. So a lot of different classes within bodybuilding. And at the amateur level, we'll see crossovers too, where people are doing classic physique and a class that they can, squeeze into as far as weight goes with bodybuilding. Typically based on your height, the cap for you, or with the bodybuilding division, height doesn't matter. It's just the weight cap. But based on like your structure and stuff with classic physique, you're most likely, if you're crossing over to bodybuilding, you're most likely going to be like pretty under, like kind of under your weight cap in terms of whatever bodybuilding class you compete in, most likely. So we have the weight caps within each of those. I'm not going to be able to name all of those off the top of my head, but they are all available on the NPC website as well. So obviously it's exactly what you would think. It's like they're all bodybuilders, but they're just getting bigger and bigger and bigger essentially. So super heavyweight's obviously going to be the biggest one. And most of the individuals that are really competitive in the super heavyweight division that graduate through the ranks are going to be the ones that are doing open bodybuilding at the pro level. Usually, like I said, more like middleweight guys, light heavyweight guys, those are probably going to be the ones that are better suited for 212 unless they continue to gain a lot of size and move into the open bodybuilding division as well. So that's essentially how it works at the amateur level. I think that pretty much covers all of the amateur level. And then at the pro level, like I mentioned, open bodybuilding is just the end all be all of bodybuilding. Essentially, it's the it's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's the Dorian Yates, it's the Ronnie Coleman. Those are all open bodybuilders, the greatest of all time to do it. So, open bodybuilding is just the most extreme, the most muscular, the most size, all of it, right? Structure matters, it does, but it's about the freak factor. It's about having just huge muscles and insane conditioning. So, that's the Mr. Olympia is going to be the one that wins open bodybuilding at the Olympia. So, it's I think that that pretty much explains it, to be honest. With bodybuilding and 212, we're going to have less coverage in the trunks. They're going to be more of a thong, if you will, for lack of a better word. And, they can be colored as well. So men's physique trunks, or I mean, classic physique trunks are going to be black. And then open bodybuilding is going to be kind of whatever color you would like, essentially. And then men's physique with the board shorts, you can kind of wear whatever. I think that they're a little bit limiting in terms of like big logos and stuff like that. But, I think that the brands that are making the board shorts, they kind of strategically place like brand logos and stuff to kind of mitigate that. But I think that that covers anything. Any thoughts on the men's divisions that I may have missed?
I don't think you mentioned, I'm not sure. All of the men's divisions except for men's physique while it's not judged, they do a posing routine.
Yes.
So I think that's, I guess, important to touch on.
100%. So, in terms of posing, I mentioned some of the mandatory poses. With open bodybuilding in 212, we have our lat spreads, front and back lat spread, and then you have most muscular pose as well. So that's swapped out for the favorite classic pose. And there's some overlap there. Like some of the classic poses look a little bit like most musculars, and you can kind of throw other poses in there as well. For all three of those divisions, you're going to have roughly, I think at the pro level, it's 60 seconds, I want to say, or 40 seconds, I believe, for amateurs, where you do like, a brief little routine essentially at prejudging. And then at the night show, you do your full presentation. You do it to a song of your choice. It's going to be a full 60-second kind of long sort of thing. At the pro level, the amounts are extended depending on the show and depending on the tier of the show as well, I believe. So posing is important. The presentation is more for the showmanship of it, for the crowd, for the fans. The posing routine, like the night show posing routines, are more of that sort of situation, like I said, to a song of your choice. But yeah, so classic physique posing, like I said, the artistry and stuff. But at the end of the day, with prejudging, that's where the judging happens. That's where most of the judging happens, at least across the board most of the way. Once you get to the Olympia, judging happens a little bit more across the board, like the whole time you're on stage, whenever you're on stage. But at like the amateur level, especially, prejudging is pretty much all that matters. Like they've decided who's winning and who's not, and then the overall they'll do live judging. So, but yeah, posing routines for anything above, like classic physique and above, you get to pose to a song of your choice, typically at the end of the day, for everybody to kind of witness. Like it's a great opportunity if you have friends and family coming out to the show, people supporting you and stuff. It's a great opportunity to get some cool footage. If there's a videographer selling packages at the show as well, it's a great opportunity to get some good content and to just show off all the hard work that you've accumulated over time. So, but I think that that covers everything for the most part. Sweet. All right. Now let's talk about like how to know what division is best for you. And I'll let you start with women's. That's usually the discussions like, should I do fit model? Should I do bikini? Should I do bikini? Should I do wellness? That's like usually the discussion. I feel like a figure and some of those other divisions are a little bit more like, I know I'm like figure or I'm doing figure. Sometimes there might be like, the discussion of like, I'm in bikini, I feel like I'm too muscular, I should do figure. So what does that all look like? And what are some things to kind of be realistic with yourself about in terms of choosing your division?
I think a lot of people, when they're starting out with bodybuilding, they may have like someone they're looking up to, or maybe someone on social media or a friend that has done that division, whether it be, fit model, bikini, wellness, figure. And so that's just the one that they jump into without thinking about like what their body, looks like. So it's tough because there's like a component of your genetics, your structure, but also what you're gravitating towards. And that's why I wanted to kind of touch on like when you're on stage with bikini or wellness, there is that like sass, whereas with figure, there's that elegance, or, each division kind of has its own little flair to it. And if you don't have that like flair, you might look like the oddball out, a little bit too. So it is kind of a combination of where you fit, but also like what you feel comfortable doing, and kind of making sure that all aligns together.
What are some things that somebody should be looking at in terms of what division fits them the best?
Okay. So I'd be looking at, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier too, but just know that you probably don't have as much muscle, regardless of the division, female or male. You probably don't, starting out, have the muscle that you think is required, and you probably are not lean enough for that division. So, like me starting out, I did have the debate of like, should I do figure or should I do bikini? Because I wasn't really sure. And I went with figure because that's what kept coming in my ear, was like, no, you have too much muscle for bikini. Do figure, do figure. I think I could have probably tried bikini, but where my heart was, where I liked the look of, was figure. So that's what I went with. Some other things you might think about is like your lifestyle. If you are someone that doesn't have the time to dedicate to what's required for like the bigger classes that require probably more time and more, we'll just say more effort, putting in more time in the gym, and then you might want to consider a division that's less musculature. And that kind of goes hand in hand with like health considerations too. If you are someone that's not to say you can't be in a bigger heavier muscle division and not have good health. Obviously we want that, but there are going to be more potential side effects or potential consequences from just health risks that come along with it, and with being a bigger muscled individual. So kind of keeping that in mind as well, like for females, like our virilization, as well as like if we are, if you're wanting to have kids, all those things we want to take into account with the division that you choose, and understanding the risks associated with those divisions. um,
Yeah, 100%. So I think really the two primary things with the female divisions is going to be one, genetics. Like, I'm sorry to break it to anybody. I'm sure that you already know this, but it's the reality of things. It's like, imagine, because I use the word talent sometimes because it's very similar. Like, I believe that a lot of what we call talent is genetic predisposition to the ability to do something well and relatively maybe even easier than somebody else may be able to do it. And bodybuilding, we really just don't, like, we talk about genetics, but I feel like people try to, like, it's like a back and forth conversation. It's like genetics are really important. It's like, oh, your genetics are like better than you think they are, which might be true. Like, you don't want to, the midline here is to not limit your beliefs based on your preconceived notions about your genetics, but at the same time, genetics are extremely important. It's like one of the primary things that are going to determine your trajectory as an athlete, and also what division you end up being successful in as well. It's like, let's just hypothetical, if you're 8 years old and you have a few different sports that you enjoy doing: basketball, baseball, football, something of that sort, right? And one of them you're just really good at naturally. Like, you're way better than all the other kids. Like, it's just something that you're just naturally good at. Those are genetic components that allowed you to be really good. And that's what we typically call talent. But a lot of that's just genetic predisposition to be able to be really good at something. So same goes for bodybuilding. Your heart may be pulling you in a certain direction in terms of like, I want to do fit model. I just really want to do fit model. But it's like, genetically speaking, like, you're just like your structure, your size, your just genetic predisposition to being able to hold on to a decent amount of muscle, or just your genetic predisposition to holding more muscularity in your legs, whatever that may look like, may kind of force you into another division. And being able to own that is important, I think, regardless of like, it's not your personal preference. If you really want to be a bodybuilder, like, owning who you are and where your strengths are is really important. So kind of coming to that determination. Now, a coach is going to definitely help guide you in that direction. They're going to tell you which division you're probably best suited for, especially if you're on the fence in terms of what division you're going to do. Danielle, you did a great job of kind of figuring that out early on. Like you're like, you figured out figure, then you're a figure pro. So it's like, you figured that out, and you have to kind of remove emotional attachment sometimes. It's like I said, hypothetical, if you're 8 years old and you're really good at basketball, and it's like maybe you like baseball a little bit better, like, but you're really good at basketball, just go all in on basketball. You still enjoy doing it, right? As long as it's not something that you hate doing, right? If you hate doing it and you're just better suited for a specific division, and you've tried that other division that you really just wanted so bad, you just haven't had success, you just have to be realistic with yourself here. So genetics play an incredibly large role in terms of determining what that's going to look like. Now, that's not to say that your genetics can't work well for a division for a time, like a time being, right? So, we talked about, you may start with fin model, and then like you just like your genetics, as you develop muscle and as your physique develops, you're just pushing more and more towards bikini, right? And there's ways to mitigate that in terms of like your strategy with nutrition and training and everything as well, and PEDs as well. But I think it's important to be realistic with yourself in terms of where you fit, and owning that as well, and just going all in on that if you truly want to be a bodybuilder. So I think that that's really important, structural stuff, genetic predisposition to being able to hold on to muscularity. One genetic predisposition that, or just not specific genetic predisposition, because a lot of these genetic components are very like sliding scale, broad spectrum, like a lot of different components to this stuff. And usually, like when we talk about it, it's just like genetics. It's just like this single thing. But genetics need to look like this entire picture of all these different things. There's a lot of things that contribute to genetic ability to do bodybuilding at a high level. And like what you mentioned too, with like virilization, for example, when it comes to PED usage, the higher we climb in terms of female divisions, the most likely it's going to be a little bit more and more aggressive in terms of PED usage. That's not to say that there aren't natural athletes at high levels, and that's not to say that there aren't athletes using way too many PEDs at a low level, right? Like we've all heard horror stories of bikini athletes taking like, women's physique level cycles and stuff. We don't want to be doing that. But in terms of realization, that's heavily genetic as well in terms of how you respond to specific drugs and stuff as well. So all these things are to be taken into consideration. You mentioned the health aspect as well. A lot of that's going to be genetically predisposed, as well as like a combination of history, what you've been doing, all that kind of stuff. So making sure that all those things are aligned are very important, and being realistic with yourself, owning who you are as a person. Because if I always say too, like somebody that walks in with confidence and is just owning who they are is going to be like their presence and their aura, and like even their attractiveness and stuff is going to be heightened by that, maybe even more than somebody that just genuinely like looks better than them, right? Like in terms of whatever, you get what I'm saying. So that stuff's important, and that presence that you're going to bring to stage in terms of owning who you are and owning your division, owning where you fit, is going to be important to that presentation as well. So then, so that's like the primary component. And then looking at, like you said, where's your heart being pulled towards? And that's important as well, because you have to have passion for the sport. You have to enjoy it. And if you are somebody that's just really well suited for a specific division, but you hate doing it, I mean, bodybuilding is not worth pursuing, to be honest, if that's the case. You're going to fight an uphill battle trying to squeeze into, it's going to be like it's like trying to squeeze a puzzle piece into somewhere where it doesn't fit. It's going to be an uphill battle, and you may just not be suited for that division. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But like I said, try to own who you are and where your strengths are and what division you fit into best, and then kind of go from there. And then like PEDs is going to be a part of this too. So, what are you comfortable with in terms of how far you're willing to push it with PEDs? Because like I said, the higher you climb in terms of divisions in the female realm, like as we climb up, we kind of did that ladder when we were talking about divisions. As you climb up, the more and more that's going to get more extreme, the more we're going to push towards risk of virilization, the more we're going to push towards other health risks as well. So being realistic with yourself in terms of what you're willing to do in that regard. And as you climb up the ladder in terms of, moving on to the pro ranks and going above that, that may get more extreme too. That's not to say that it has to, but it has potential to. So you have to understand that there are risks involved in this sport, regardless of what division you're in. And, I am not well versed in fit model at the pro level right now, but I I'm pretty confident that they're using PEDs as well in that division. So, it's prevalent across the board in terms of risk, dose duration, different compounds that are utilized, all that kind of stuff. It can just get more and more pushed in terms of the envelope as you climb up. So it's something to be realistic with yourself about as well in terms of what your ambitions are. Because if you're doing it just as like a little hobby, whatever, that's fine. But if you're wanting to be a truly competitive bodybuilder and climb the ranks, that's something to be realistic with yourself about in terms of choosing your division in the female realm specifically. Not to say that that doesn't apply to the men's stuff too, but like the virilization stuff is important to understand. And then, like I said, as you climb down the ladder and up the ladder, it's like where the femininity can be preserved a little bit more. We talked about reproductive health as well. All that stuff can be mitigated and harm can be reduced if you're working with a good coach, trust me. But at the end of the day, you still have to be realistic with yourself in terms of there's risk involved. But I always say that, life has inherent risk. You could stepping out your front door is a risk, hopping in your car and driving your car is a risk. Like, we're not going to sit here and just be scared of stuff all the time, but being realistic with yourself in terms of what the risks are and being responsible about that as well. So important stuff. Anything else that we can think of in terms of fitting into a division?
I mean, really, that's like nail on the head. Those are the big things as far as if you are like someone, again, for the majority of us, we're going to be told that we're not big enough, but there are the outliers that are told they're too big in certain areas. Like coming to mind, Megan Santa Barbara, she started in figure and then she tried to get into wellness. And then there was, I guess, just some things with that. And now she's on the Olympia stage doing women's physique. So if you are one of those being told, you're too big, you need to downsize, but you're not willing to, you still want, like, for the love of bodybuilding, to bodybuild, you still want to train the way that you train. It might require you changing what division that you started out with. And same thing with like male divisions as well. We see that a lot, that a lot of competitors might start out with men's physique as an entry point, but if they have those genetics, they grow quickly and then they might switch over to classic physique or even open bodybuilding. So if you have that love for like training hard in the gym, and while yes, genetics do play like a big majority of the role, your effort to improve your physique, I think, can get you a long way as well, especially, at an amateur level. Yes, when we get up towards like pro Olympians and stuff like that, it's going to get very like detailed as far even just like your muscle insertions where they are, and that's where like your posing is very like detailed, and that's where your genetics do play a much bigger role. But at least I feel like at the amateur level, your effort can get you a long way.
100%. Yeah. And I mean, the genetic thing, like I said, you don't want to create, limits for yourself in terms of like, your genetics may be better than you think that they are. They may be worse than you think that they are. It could be all kinds of stuff, but you're not going to know until you try, right? So, as your physique develops too, you may be unlocking your genetics in terms of where your strengths are. You may start to expose things because genetics are exposed by environment and by how they're stimulated as well. So, or signaled, I should say. So, as you start to train and gain muscularity and get leaner and your structure is more and more exposed, you're going to be able to learn more about yourself and where your strengths and weaknesses are as well. And as you develop, you may fit well into a division for the time being, but as your physique develops, you may start to drift into another division as well. So it's kind of one of those things where you kind of have to be realistic with yourself in terms of where your strengths and weaknesses are at the moment, and then start to develop and see how things play out. And just, judges may tell you too, like, hey, you're better suited for this other division, try it out, and you may do extremely well. So just be open minded. Like I said, try not to be too emotionally attached to a specific division. Try to kind of analyze what things are looking like at the pro level, amateur level, national level, all that kind of stuff. See what's going on, see what you gravitate towards, see where your strengths and weaknesses are, take all those things into consideration. And then with women specifically, take into consideration like the virilization risks as you climb up the ladder as well. But yeah, I think that covers females pretty well. like I said, it's usually the discussion of like, should I do wellness or bikini or this and that. So, talk to your coach. Your coach should be the primary one to help guide you in that direction if you're kind of on the fence about things. I've definitely helped a lot of athletes like move away from divisions where they weren't better suited, like moved them into divisions where they were better suited and playing on their strengths and stuff. And sometimes, it's a difficult conversation because they may really want to do a specific division, but after that discussion and moving them in, it's usually they're usually pretty happy about things. So, I've seen fit model move into bikini, and it's like bikini is like just way better suited for them. I've seen athletes move from bodybuilding to classic, like we had Jacob do. And he had a lot of success this year. So stuff like that, you want to have a coach that's going to guide you in the right directions and be willing to have those conversations with you as well. So moving into the men's divisions now, this is genetics are going to play a huge role here as well, structurally, everything, and then kind of what you gravitate towards. I would say that like the lines are maybe a little bit more blurred when it comes to men, because like there's a lot of men's bodybuilders that were like moved into men's physique, for example, and did really well. Like Jeremy Buendia was a bodybuilder before he moved into men's physique, and he was Mr. Olympia, multi-time Mr. Olympia in the men's physique division. So as an example where like the lines are a little bit more blurred, I think, in the men's divisions. And now that men's physique is having legs as a criteria as well, I think like they're more and more looking like classic guys with the board shorts on. So a little bit more blurred lines here in terms of like muscularity. Like I said, with men's physique, it's gotten more and more muscular too. So a lot of these guys are holding as much size as some of the divisions above them, or maybe even more size than some of the classic guys, for example. So that's something to take into consideration here. In terms of what fits you best, like, I feel like with the blurred lines, you can move a little bit more with what you're gravitated towards, if that makes sense. So like if you feel like you really like the men's physique division and you like that look and you like the poses and you like the aesthetic of it, and you're a more muscle guy, but you have a good V taper and small waist and structurally like really broad shoulders, men's physique may be a good option for you. And then classic physique, if you love the artistry, you love posing, you love that kind of stuff, I feel like classic physique may be a better fit for you as well. Like I said, structure is going to be important here. Genetics are just as important, but I think in terms of like lines blurred across the divisions, I think it's a little bit more spread out. Now, muscularity is going to be important here because like your ability to put on and hold on to size is going to be important, that genetic component. You're going to have individuals that are more genetically predisposed to just being more muscular and being able to hold on to more muscle and continue to pack on more muscle. And that's not to say that you can't get more muscular, like regardless of your genetics, but in terms of being able to push that size to those limits, like, good luck trying. If you're somebody that's like 180 pounds and you want to be 250, like open bodybuilder, like that's going to be a long journey ahead that may not be able to get accomplished. You know what I mean? Just being realistic here. So that's important in terms of like size, like your ability to put on size. But like I said, some blurred lines here because the sizes are a little bit more like comparable in comparison to like the female divisions, right? The sizes are a lot more, there's a broader gap, I would say, in terms of size. So 212 is going to be like, if you're a pro, 212 is going to be more appropriate for you if you're more of that like light heavyweight middleweight bodybuilder kind of look and you love bodybuilding. Like that's probably going to be your thing. If you like turn pro as like a light heavyweight, like 212 is probably the best option for you, unless you have good structure for classic and you want to move into that. That can be an option that's available to you. Like I said, classic is where structure is going to be more important. If not, it's probably going to be like comparable in terms of importance with men's physique, because you can't have like, you have to have a small waist. Like you just genetically speaking, you have to have a small waist. Your waist has to be able to get small. You have to be able to like at least pose in a way that shows that you have a really small waist, and structurally you have a really solid X frame, really broad shoulders. Like I said, it's that Arnold Schwarzenegger, Frank Zane look where it's just really small waist, just aesthetically pleasing, balanced physique with really good conditioning and stuff. So that's where that's going to be important. The physique needs to be aesthetically pleasing to look at for classics. So genetic structure becomes a little bit more of an importance there. So, but that's not to say that that isn't important across the divisions, it just becomes a little bit more important there. So in terms of picking your division, PEDs are going to be a little bit less of a conversation as it is for females because of like the virilization side of things. with the men's divisions, I would say that the PEDs don't vary greatly across the divisions, if that makes sense. You could have open bodybuilding guys that are running just as much gear as a men's physique guy. So it's a little bit less of a conversation there. That's not to say that those dosages and compounds and that kind of stuff can vary across divisions. I mean, there's men's physique guys that dabble with insulin, just like there's open guys that are using insulin and vice versa. So it's kind of all over the place in terms of PED stuff, and a little bit more flatlined across the board in terms of what that looks like. So risk involved is going to be comparable across the divisions when it comes to PED usage specifically, but holding that much size and pushing your size to that extent as you climb up the ranks, it's the risk becomes more about the size that you're carrying and how far you're pushing that. Sometimes the dosages will climb greater and greater, and the more muscle you hold on to too, the larger dosages you kind of need to hold on to that muscle. So that's where it can, the larger the size, sometimes the more PEDs can be involved. That's not an inherent truth, but it can be something to take into consideration. Just carrying around that much body weight, that lean mass around, can have its own risks. Obviously a lot of sleep apnea, we see a lot of like higher risk for heart disease and that kind of stuff as well. It's just because of how much size you're carrying around. It's not necessarily just because of the PD. So a lot of contributing factors there in terms of risk and risk assessment, but it's a little bit less of like an escalation across like as you climb up than it would be with female competitors, I would say, generally speaking. So in terms of picking your division, like I said, you can probably pick the one that is your heart gravitates towards a little bit more. That becomes less apparent like as you are closer to like the amateur ranks, I would probably say, because in order to climb the ranks in any of these divisions, size is required. And now that men's physique has the leg requirement as well, or the criteria as well, so you probably have legs if you're in men's physique to some extent. Now, usually transition, like, because I'm an example of this where I did my first two shows as men's physique and then I transitioned into classic physique. It took me a long time to put the size on my legs, but I did it. So, it's doable. The reason for that, though, is that you probably haven't been training legs as hard because they're covered by board shorts, right? So, like, they are a criteria now. So, you do have to have legs developed. You do have to train legs, but they're not as exposed. Like, you don't have to come with striated glutes, like, it's just not a thing. So, being realistic with yourself in terms of do you have the size on the lower half? Should you maybe do men's physique first and then work on your legs, growing your legs more, building a more complete physique to transition into classic if your heart gravitates towards that? So similar things to like the female stuff as well, where you kind of have to play on your strong points and then kind of develop things from there. Then if you're in classic physique and you're just really struggling to get in the weight cap, or you just can't get into the weight cap, then you're probably better suited for bodybuilding. So that's where size can become an issue as well. It's like, I'll use Jacob as an example again. I'm sure he won't mind us using him as an example on this podcast, but he was bodybuilding and he went from middleweight to light heavyweight. And then I just had to have the conversation with him. His structure was much better suited for classic physique. And I'd planted those seeds with him for a while, but he really loved bodybuilding. So I was like, let's keep gaining size and fit into it. And that's not to say that he can't eventually do bodybuilding again, because he most certainly probably could. But we transitioned into classic physique because, it was an uphill battle trying to chase that size to fill out his frame enough to stand next to the bodybuilders at light heavyweight. By the time we hit like the cap for that, it's going to be moving into heavyweights. And then it's going to be like the same thing all over again, right? It's just like a never ending cycle. So moving him into classic, being realistic with your size and what size you're carrying and how it relates to your structure as well, because sometimes bodybuilding, shorter guys and being able to hold on to more size, because in bodybuilding, the classes, we don't have the height, we just have the weight. So shorter guys are going to look larger. They're going to look like they have more size, right? If you're a little bit taller, like Jacob's like a little bit taller than than I would say the typical guy in like a light heavyweight division is going to be in terms of just a little bit more stockiness, if that makes sense. So just like that size comparison, right? Versus like the aesthetically pleasing thing. When we're in the bodybuilding division, I might have failed to say this, but size is a heavier criteria there. So size is one of the primary things they're looking for. How big are you, right? Classic physique is more about the shape and the structure. So that's another example of just like being realistic with how much muscle you're carrying, how much muscle you need to carry in order to fit in the division. Like I said, a little bit more blurred lines because you can probably grow into that division if you really want to. But for the time being, play on your strengths and then work your way up, essentially, I think is a good strategy. And like I said, bodybuilders have transitioned into men's physique. Like, you have to play on your strengths and find where you fit best. So I think that covers most of it, right? Any other comments on the men's stuff?
No, but that was a good point that I didn't think to touch on, was just your height. Like, just keep in mind, if you are a taller individual, I mean, I'm coming from the female perspective, but if you are a taller male, you have more frame to fill out, regardless of what division you're in or what class you're in. And so just know that that's going to take more time, more effort. But if you can come in with that size and that conditioning, then you're going to look phenomenal on stage, next to someone that's shorter with comparable like muscle and conditioning. Just, it's the unfortunate reality of being tall.
Yeah. Like we said, genetics, right? Genetics are one of those things that just needs to be, it's arguably the most important aspect of bodybuilding in terms of how things play out. But it's just as important, like it's important everywhere, in terms of where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, who you are as a person. You just have to own that stuff, We're all unique individuals, all bio individual uniqueness that we carry ourselves. So own that, it's not like you don't want to look at genetics as like, man, I have crappy genetics. Like, no, you just have your genetics, right? So play on your strengths. You may be really good at something else. Like if you may be just phenomenal at something else that it has nothing to do with bodybuilding. Like if you're listening to this, play on your strengths. That's not to say that you can't do multiple or be good at many things, right? But you're going to have a much more fulfilling life when you play on your strengths, own who you are. It's not that you have good or bad genetics. It's that you have your genetics, right? And own that, be confident in yourself, and go out and play on your strengths, do the things that you like doing. Sometimes you may enjoy doing something regardless of like your ability to do it at the highest level. That's fine too. So end on a little bit of a positive note though. So I think that was pretty thorough. Thank you for joining me today, Danielle. That was great insight for everybody. Do you have any final remarks about any of these topics or anything?
Just that this is the time where we have the most divisions in bodybuilding. We covered them all, and so this is the best time, I think, to get into bodybuilding, because you have so many options of divisions that will reward your physique and your structure, whereas in the beginning, when there was just one or two divisions, we have so many options now, so you can kind of explore. Just know that you got to be patient, you got to take time, and you got to put in the work.
Well said. We'll end on that note, but thank you for joining me today. Danielle, where can everybody find you on Instagram?
At Danielle_626.
You can find me at Sean Irwin, SEANIRWIN, like the crocodile hunter _. And you can find us at Saga Coaching as well. So we look forward to chatting with you guys next time. Danielle, thanks again for coming on today and sharing some insight. And we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us. Your journey towards excellence does not end here. We're here to help guide you every step of the way. For more insights and to become a part of our community, follow and subscribe. Your feedback illuminates our path. Be sure to share your thoughts and stay tuned for more episodes.